Hey folks, I don't know if you can hear me yet, but I'm just going to go ahead and welcome somebody from Hope, Idaho, Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles, Dallas, Texas, Illinois. Isn't it cool that we can all meet this way all across the country? England and the other countries as well. Cary, North Carolina, Wendell, Massachusetts, Burlington, Vermont, Aubrey, Texas, Columbus, Georgia, Oklahoma. Isn't it cool? Now you're gone by, so I'm not going to be able to ask you specifically where you live in Oklahoma. I used to be a waitress in Tulsa, of course, but had good friends in Muskogee as well. Everett and uh, Coweta, was that it? Coweta, Oklahoma. Tucson, Arizona, Fond du Lac. My dad used to go to Fond du Lac, and we're holding on here for Facebook. San Diego, Casper, Wyoming, Washington, D.C. Man, keep the faith there. I never know how to pronounce. Is it Cuyahoga Falls? Melbourne, Florida. Yes, Facebook is being a pain, but you know what? It has I have, at most of the other channels I'm on, I have contacts. So if something goes wrong on the YouTube account, for example, they're really responsive about taking down all the fake posts that people, you people write to me and you tell me that there's a fake channel. And somebody got to me after there were only 3 subscribers to the other channel, and YouTube had it down in less than an hour. And I just don't have any contacts like that at Facebook. Glendale, Maryland, Waltham, Mass, the home of clocks. One of these days, I'm going to tell you about clocks. And actually, if North Carolina doesn't get here, I'm sorry, if Facebook doesn't get here, North Carolina is here. I might tell you about clocks today. Anne from Walla Walla, Washington. Somebody on the Cape. Is it good on the Cape? Today I actually went out kayaking this morning, and it was cold, of course. I was in a wetsuit, and it was about 39 degrees, but the wind was pretty intense. I finally came back because I thought, be one thing if it were July, maybe not such a great idea in mid-October. All right, I'm actually not seeing Facebook coming on here, so maybe we should just assume it's not going to be here. I don't like that because a lot, that's where I started, was on Facebook. I don't like them not being here. It does. Oh, wait, somebody says Facebook is on. Thank you, Valerie. All right, so let's jump into some of your questions. I'm going to start in a place today where nobody asked me to start, but it's, to my mind, one of the most important things that's happened in the last 2 days. And it has been a week. I don't know if you all are exhausted. I am. This whole 24-hour news cycle is designed to exhaust us, and let me tell you, it works. So make sure you take breaks. In any case, one of the things that happened yesterday that kind of went under a lot of people's radar screens was the fact that the Trump administration, and I'm using that term very carefully now because a lot of people are ascribing all the actions that are coming out of the Oval Office to Trump. And I'm watching him, and I don't think he's the one making all these decisions. Allegedly his signature was on this, but coming out of the Oval Office yesterday was an announcement from the Trump administration that it would pay the furloughed military personnel whose paychecks were due yesterday. It would pay them, or maybe I think it was yesterday. I think it's the 15th. I'm sorry, I could be wrong on that. Somewhere here in the middle of the month, that it would pay them out of a different pot of money. That is, the military budget is annual. So when the fiscal year ended on September 30th, so too did the pot of money to pay the military personnel. Now, other things were budgeted for over 2 years. So there are some things that still have pots of money in them. And Trump said he was going to take money from one of those things to pay the troops. This is a huge deal. And today, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said, the Democrats say it's illegal, but this was just a creative solution. And why don't they want to pay the troops? In fact, the Democrats do want to pay the troops. Everybody wants to pay the troops. The issue about paying the troops is that Mike Johnson won't call the House back into session to pass any measures, because if he does that, he's going to have to swear in Adelita Grijalva from Arizona, who was elected on September 23rd and will provide the last signature for the discharge petition that will require the House to take a vote on whether or not to release the investigation files into convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. And we know that Trump's name is in those files. So in effect, the House is shut down to keep from having to swear in Adelita Grijalva. So yes, the Democrats want to fund the troops as well. But the reason that this is a really big deal, I'm sort of beside myself. If you read my letters, and by the way, people often ask me questions that I've answered at length in a recent letter. Just a reminder that I do these explainers, but I also write about the news or about history every night. Usually, I try and take one night off a week, but you can search more effectively on Facebook than on Substack. They're free on Substack too, by the way. But if you have a question that you're wondering if I've answered, that's a good place to start, because sometimes I do a deep dive, as I did yesterday, for example, in the Voting Rights Act, but I will talk more about that today. Anyway, the reason that this is a huge deal is because, first of all, there is a law on the books called the Anti-Deficiency Act. It's a sort of a law that's evolved since about 1870. And that law says that the government cannot pre-spend money. It cannot charge things, if you will, that it cannot pay for. And it can't agree to contracts that are not funded. And the reason for that is because in the late 19th century, especially coming out of the Civil War, but then really going into the 1880s, agencies in the government were prone to running up bills and then coming back to Congress and saying, we have to fund it. I already spent it. And that's a big problem. And that problem is not only that the anti-deficiency law is there to stop things like the spending of money that doesn't exist, as Trump has done, and as, by the way, Kristi Noem did over last summer for the Department of Homeland Security, but also because the fundamental principle on which the founders fought for independence, and the fundamental principle that they wrote into the Constitution, was the idea that the government cannot spend our tax dollars without our say in it. And that's a principle that goes all the way back to, in a form, to the Magna Carta of 1215. That is the central principle of the way the American government was originally set up. That's why the founders rebelled. That's why they fought against the tea tax, the tax on tea. It was actually not the tax on tea that sparked the Boston Tea Party in 1773, by the way. It was the Tea Act. There was a tax put on tea and a number of other products in, I'm going to go with 1770. Off the top of my head. But there was such protest against tax on lead, for example, and tax on glass, that they got rid of all those, but they kept the tax on tea because they wanted to keep the principle that Parliament and the king could tax the Americans, or the colonists at the time, whether or not they were represented in Parliament. And then in 1773, with the Tea Act, what they did is they gave a monopoly on one particular tea company, and that would lower the price of tea. And the colonists recognized that lower prices might get people to say, okay, we'll buy that tea anyway. And that would establish the principle that that Parliament could tax the colonists whether or not they had representation. And that's what led to the Boston Tea Party. And you know where all that went from there. So the idea that Americans want to pay the troops, so they should put up with this extraordinary power grab, looks very similar to that. And what Trump has done by saying, oh, I'm just going to take money from over here to use to pay the troops, is he is undermining the fundamental concept that is embodied in the Constitution, which is that only Congress, only the legislative branch, can make appropriations and decide how our tax dollars are spent. Only Congress. That is in the Constitution. And crucially, it's only the House of Representatives that can discuss and pass any bill that any measure that is going to raise taxes. That you have to start appropriations measures in the House of Representatives. Now, there's some workarounds to that, but that's in the Constitution. And the reason for that goes back to that very same principle that the government cannot spend our money without our say. And our say is represented by those people who sit in the House of Representatives and in the Senate and make up the Congress. And the executive branch only has the power to make sure that those laws are faithfully executed. That's in the Constitution. So for Trump to say, I'm paying the troops, this is a great thing that I found money, completely negates the entire idea that we get to decide how our money is spent. And once you have done that, what do you need Congress for? And in fact, you're seeing that right now with a story coming out that came out this afternoon in CNN, where representatives in Congress from Republican districts, Republican members of Congress are saying, hey, they're slashing programs, and I'm learning about it in press releases. This is a major, major step toward the consolidation of an authoritarian power. And it's one of those things that I feel like people maybe didn't look at because it was in a little statement on the White House website. And it just didn't get the attention it needed to get because, of course, yes, we want the troops paid, but we want the troops paid by Congress being in session and passing a law that says, let's pay the members of the military. We don't want to say, yes, we're so desperate to pay the military that we're okay with having a dictator simply take money that Congress said, hey, we're putting together some money because we care about this issue, and having a president say, no, I don't really care about that, so I'm going to use this money to pay the troops. That divorces the use of our tax dollars from our representatives, and it is an unbelievably huge deal. Now, I could go on this, but I'm going to go to the questions you asked, and I'll come back to something like that at the end. All right. You asked questions about the Voting Rights Act and the hearing that the Supreme Court had yesterday on that. It was simply a hearing yesterday. They will hand down their decisions in the spring. I don't remember when they hand down decisions, but there is a period in which they start to hand down decisions. What they do is they hear cases, then they send their clerks out to research the cases. They think about how they're going to decide. They discuss how they're going to decide, at least they used to. And then one member of the court will be assigned the responsibility of writing up the majority opinion. So we don't know how that's going to come out. It certainly sounded as if the 6 radicals on the court would get rid of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, would say that you can't use that. Now, the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is actually quite short, but what it does is it says that no state or the federal government will mess around with laws that discriminate against the ability of individuals to elect people that they want to elect. And the way that the Congress made sure that in the Voting Rights Act in 1965, what they were doing, the Voting Rights Act in that year, is actually titled an act to make the 15th Amendment work. And the 15th Amendment says that Black men can't be discriminated against based on race, color, previous condition of servitude, but it says nobody can, I think. Male is inserted in the 14th Amendment. I'm not sure it's in the 15th, but the second section of the 15th Amendment, as does the 13th and the 14th, says Congress may pass legislation to make this amendment happen. And so after about 1874, when Southern states, Democratic dominated states, made it impossible for Black Americans to vote, finally in 1965, Congress stepped in and did what it was supposed to do, and it passed the Voting Rights Act. And it said you can't mess around with people's votes based on their racial or ethnic minorities. And when they did that, one of the questions is, like, what do you do? I mean, you can look at a Southern state and at the time and say, hey, everybody's allowed vote, although they weren't. It was a 65 law that made that happen. But then what does it mean if you arrange the districts in such a way that Black Americans in the South can never elect somebody that they want through the system of cracking, in that case, making sure that they were always outnumbered in a district by white voters, even though in Louisiana, for example, a third of people who live in Louisiana are Black. So what the courts have decided over since 65, as recently as 2017, by the way, that one of the ways you get over that sort of built-in discrimination is to make it possible to create districts that are majority minority. I hate that term, but that have a predominance of a group of color, of some sort of color. And it's Hispanic, Asian American, and Black usually. And that you, by creating these districts, you're going to give those people a voice. And what this case that is currently being considered by the Supreme Court says is that taking race into consideration at all is a violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments, sort of a reverse discrimination case. And if they do that, if they do get rid of the second section of the Voting Rights Act, then estimates are that Democrats will lose, I believe it's between 12 and 19 seats in the American South. And that's a game changer. So we'll see what happens there. I don't have time to do a really long dive into the Voting Rights Act and the implications of these cases, but that's what people are talking about with the Voting Rights Act. Now, I just saw flying by, somebody said we should get rid of this and just have at-large voting districts. Listen, I'm not a math person. I don't have the solution here, but I do know that partisan gerrymandering is not the solution. And I also know that people who study election law and who do math say there's lots of ways we could fix this stuff. We just have to have the will to fix it. Our system is now very badly skewed in favor of the Republican Party, which has been taken over by this radical faction. And with luck, that will encourage all Americans who don't support that faction to come out and say, hey, I want my democracy back. And one of the things that partisan gerrymandering has done is it has empowered the really far right people. And if you look at any statistic of what's happened to the stances of politicians over the last 40 years, what you will see is Democrats haven't moved much at all. They got a little bit more to the left when the Dixiecrats, the segregationist Democrats, peeled off and went with the Republicans, but it's the Republicans who have simply gone over a cliff. And I wrote most of my books are about the Republican Party, and it does not have to be this way. All right, so that was one of your questions about that. You asked about John Bolton, who has been indicted today by a federal grand jury in Maryland on 8 counts of sharing information, secret information with people who were not entitled to it, and 10 counts of retaining classified information when he shouldn't have. This is really throwing the book at the man, and there are many ways in which this case is interesting. John Bolton has a long history in the U.S. government, and his, I think it was his last assignment, was that he was Trump's national security advisor, one of Trump's national security advisors in Trump's first term. But he broke pretty dramatically with Trump and went on to write a book called In the Room Where It Happened, and the subtitle was something like My Years in the White House. Let me see if I wrote it down here. Yeah, The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir. And that was so scathing of Trump that Trump tried to keep it from being published. There was a huge fight over it. So what's interesting here is, first of all, don't take grand juries as the final word. When you go before a grand jury, you present the information for the prosecution. There's no defense. They're just trying to see, is there enough here to prosecute? And even still, in that case, it took getting rid of a number of legal people from the Department of Justice and replacing them with Trump lackeys in order to get indictments recently against New York Attorney General Letitia James and come on, who's the other guy? Come on, there's 2 of them. Who's the other guy? Oh, come on. Oh, here we go. James Comey, director of the FBI, James Comey, who is countersuing, saying that he has been prosecuted for vindictive prosecution, and that Lindsay Halligan, the person that Trump has slotted into a U.S. Attorney's Office position in order to prosecute him, was not qualified for that. And I've read a lot about that. That sounds like that very well might hold water. Not a lawyer, just saying. People I trust are looking at that. I could explain why, but it's probably not the time. All right. So the prosecution of Bolton, again, I don't know. This is what a grand jury has said, 18 counts. But there's some very interesting things in the indictment, which I have read. Of course, none of us have seen the evidence, but the indictment itself focuses a lot on that book that upset Trump so much. And it charges that Bolton sent diary-like excerpts of his time in the White House to two other individuals to whom he is related. And CNN reported a while back that would be his wife and his daughter. We do not know. They are not identified in the indictment. But it goes into great detail about him doing this, and then about the book deal he got, and about the advance he got for his book deal. And then it goes into how he should have known better about handling classified documents, because of the way he talked about how the Trump administration handles documents. And they really layered it on a lot with his statements about Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary's use of, I think it was actually a knockoff of the messaging app Signal, to organize the military strike against the Houthis in Yemen, the first group of which had included a journalist from The Atlantic, and the second of which was his friends and family. So who knows? I mean, we'll see in this trial what happens, but there is no doubt that regardless of whether or not Bolton actually retained the documents he did, or did whatever, there is no doubt that this is a reaction to Trump's insistence that he is being treated unfairly by his enemies. Of course, Bolton was an appointee of his. And he wants to make it very clear that he will go after absolutely anyone. And this is a warning to the people around him to keep their mouths shut. And that's an important warning right now, as more and more cracks are showing up in the administration. All right, so somebody asked a great question, and I think it's an important question also in this moment, about the Supreme Court. And the person said, and this is not a direct quote, shouldn't they be worried that as they are destroying all the guardrails of our democracy, that Trump's not going to need them either? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I think that there has been something very interesting that often has flown under the radar with this Supreme Court. And that is, although we pay a lot of attention to the fact that in July 1st of 2024, they, in the case of Donald J. Trump versus the United States, gave the president seeming unlimited power by saying that a president could not be prosecuted for crimes committed as part of official duties while in office. There was something in that again, a lot of people missed, but I thought was very important, because everyone kept saying, well, then free reign to Biden, he can do whatever he wants. But no, because in that case, what they said as well was that because we've never had a determination like this before, because no president has ever made the audacious argument that he is not covered by the laws. Okay, that decision, just, if you go back and read what I wrote that day, I said this is the most important decision in American history because it changes our entire form of government. But what they said in it was, because we've never had this system before, we don't really know what an official duty is. So the courts are going to have to decide that. Well, who's the ultimate court? The Supreme Court. So in many ways, they were taking on themselves the right to decide what was an official duty and what a president could do. They were really basically saying the Supreme Court gets to decide all these things. Well, they've said things like that before, and this whole shadow docket idea where they're just handing down decisions with no explanation and telling people how to behave is, I think, a sign of this idea that they are the final word to everything. But that might be starting to come up against reality in the sense that the Trump administration is pretty openly ignoring the courts. So if they make a decision and Trump decides not to follow it, where are they going to go? And that's, that's a real concern on their part. Now, whether or not they care about that, whether or not they're aware of that, I don't know the answer. But I don't know how you look at the way he is treating all the other norms, guidelines, laws, and constitutional limits of our nation and think, oh, yeah, he's going to do what the Supreme Court says. No, they're there to rubber stamp what he wants. And they might be waking up to that. Certainly, we know John Roberts cares about his legacy. Do the others? Who knows? But I thought that was a really interesting question because you can see one of the reasons I like it is because we think a lot and we talk a lot about the everyday. What do you do if you do this? What happens here? But there are philosophical principles and problems buried in the United States system of government that are very much alive. And that question, I think, is one that has got to be on the mind at least of John Roberts. How he's going to answer, I don't know. But those are the sorts of questions that I think we should be thinking about in this moment as so much is changing. All right. So you asked about a motion to vacate the speaker's seat in the House of Representatives because Johnson ain't doing nothing. He's simply keeping the House out of session, which is bonkers, by the way. But the issue with the motion to vacate that may be having you confused a little bit is that, and I'm not going to go through all the twists and turns of this, but if you remember, Kevin McCarthy, who was the speaker before Johnson, had consolidated a following by accepting rules that made it really, really easy to vacate the chair. In this Congress, they changed the rules. They change the rules every time Congress starts, which, by the way, is really interesting when you see it, what rules get just automatically rolled over and so on. But anyway, in the process of passing the rules this time around, they changed how many Republicans would be needed to challenge the chair from, I think it was 1 under McCarthy to 9 now. You're going to get 9 Republicans willing to toss him overboard and work with the Democrats. That's a pretty steep number in the House. Now I don't know because there is a lot going on, as I say, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. All right, one more question here about what's going on in the country that I wanted to talk about, and then I want to talk about what's going on with those of us who are trying to restore American democracy. You asked about these comments that were leaked to Politico from the Young Republicans chat of young Republicans from 4 states in the country. Don't remember off the top of my head which ones they were, so I'm not going to try it and get one of them wrong and humiliate somebody. They were vile. They were, they celebrated, I mean, I don't even want to say it, to be honest. If you can think it, it was in there. Okay. So, and they were, yeah, there we go. They were celebrating Nazism. They were, admiring Adolf Hitler. They, it was really, really bad stuff. And the question was, how were Republican leaders, lawmakers, although one of these was a state senator, how were they going to react? And at first, a number of Republican organizations kicked these people out, which is interesting. And it's worth remembering that these were not powerful people. That is, they were powerful compared to you and me in the government, staffers, a state senator, or whatever. But we're not talking the vice president of the United States. I mean, these people could have been replaced and will be replaced in a week tops, and nobody's going to notice the change. Um, that sounds really harsh, and I'm sure their families love them. But my point is that these are not upper level people. So at first they're like, they're out, they're done. But then Vice President J.D. Vance went on a podcast and defended them as kids saying stupid stuff. And I want to call that out, both because he did not disavow it and because he basically signaled that that kind of talk was okay. And the other thing he said was he called these people kids. And I believe they ranged in age from 22 to 40. And I wanted to call that out because one of the big tropes in American history is when people in power are trying to excuse bad behavior among the in-group. They say, oh, it was just somebody being silly. It was just a child. He's young. And you'll notice that the media often talks that way about the Trump children who are full-blown adults. And sort of as an excuse. But the flip side of that is that people who are not in that in-group are considered adults from a really young age and are treated similarly. And this really shows up with attacks on young Black girls who are, 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds who are, manhandled, treated brutally by authorities with the idea that, they should be treated like adults, even though they are children. It's important in the Black community and the brown community. But even when people talk about that, they rarely talk about how important that is to the Indigenous community. And this is something that if you study Indigenous history, you see all the freaking time that Indigenous people are essentially treated as adults from the time they're babies, certainly in history, as if they are responsible for adult behavior even as a 2-year-old, and are treated as such. And that's one of those things that kind of makes my skin crawl. And I wanted to call it out because I'm sorry, you're responsible for your behavior as an adult. And 25, 32, 33, 40, however old these people are, they weren't kids. Mind you, we all do stupid things when we're younger. I do stupid things now that I'm older, but I also have to take responsibility for them. And my stupid is not what that kind of stupid was. So I wanted to call that one out there. All right. So here's what I want to say now. I want to go back to where I started with that idea of the attacks of this administration on the Constitution and on the laws that make up the rules under which we live. Because right now, the Republican leadership is insisting that the No Kings rally that is going to be held on Saturday, October 18th, is made up of people who hate America, who are terrorists, and so on. And I want to call that out because they are clearly extraordinarily worried about it. They're also focusing on Washington, D.C., which I think is worth having in your minds if you are going to be protesting in Washington, D.C. They seem to me to be trying to stir up violence and to say that the people who are going to be turning out are un-American. And the reason that they're doing that is because what the Trump administration is doing is unbelievably unpopular. And they are trying to create this image of those people who dislike the administration, of people who are dangerous, un-American, and burning down cities, for example. And just today, there was a report in which a news outlet did reverse searches on one of the films that the Trump administration has been circulating to talk about violence in, I think that one was Chicago. And the films were not from Chicago. They were from all over the country, including southern states, and ICE raids as far back as 2023 in states across the union. And they put them all together and said, here's the violence that you're seeing right now in, like I said, I'm not sure which city it was. I'll get it right before I write about it. But they're making it up. They are making it up. So why does the No Kings protest matter? And why does protesting in the streets matter? I'm seeing people saying, oh, it's just performative and it doesn't matter. If things that were performative did not matter, I promise you the Trump administration would not be throwing videos at us constantly. Showing people what you believe is crucially important, not least because the power in our government comes from we, the people. Literally, in our document, our Constitution, we take our power and we give it temporarily to leaders that we elect to write laws under which we agree to live. If we demonstrate that we do not approve of that government, that's a signal that it is losing its legitimacy. This is incredibly important to do. But it's important to do for another reason as well. You are not just demonstrating against a government, you are showing your neighbors who might be a little shy about getting out there that they are not alone. You're creating solidarity. And another piece of that is that if you can go out and you can protest, in your frog ears, as my friend Joanne will do, in a suit, in whatever. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, and demonstrate community and joy and creativity. That undermines the idea that America is under siege by those people who are trying to force the administration to adhere to the law. So showing up in huge numbers at this rally is really, really going to matter. Now, let me say a little bit more about that. As I've said a lot, if you listen to me talk about protesting in the United States, I don't know about other countries, in the United States, crucially important to be nonviolent. It is crucially important to be nonviolent. Violence in the United States always backfires, as you're seeing with what ICE is doing especially in Chicago. People don't like to see their neighbors taken out and beaten up, and they're frightened of it. So absolute nonviolence, talk to people about how to stay safe and so on. But let me add some things for wherever you're protesting. Carry your American flag. We are America. We are the ones who are defending the Constitution and who are defending the principles of the Declaration of Independence and who are defending this country at its best. We are the ones who own that flag. Get those flags all over you. That being said, those of you who are older, usually white and usually women, we need to be really visible. Because again, what the administration is trying really hard to do is put the face of opposition to that administration onto undocumented immigrants and calling them criminals and murderers and rapists. They're trying to say that if you disagree with us, you're one of those dangerous people. I think it's a lot harder to look at, an older white woman and say, yes, that's the face of American terrorism. And so people like us need to be really, really visible in that. And again, the carrying signs that have cool slogans. So maybe you might want to say who you, not literally your name, but what you do for a living. I'm a teacher. I'm a podcaster. I'm a construction worker. I'm a nurse. Because we need to demonstrate that we're just ordinary people, that we're not being paid by, some nefarious group, and that we are the ones who are trying to take back the country. Now, that, again, people have said, oh, that's not enough. It's just stupid to be out there. And the answer to that is absolutely not. But it isn't enough. That is everything you're doing right now to keep pressure on the administration to speak up against the midterm partisan gerrymandering, to speak up in favor of people who are trying to advance democracy. That really matters. And I want to throw out here again that there are, I believe it's 52,000 races coming up in November around the country, elections coming up around the country. And in Maine, for example, there is a ballot question trying to get rid of absentee ballots. 40% of people in Maine vote with absentee ballots. That doesn't mean they don't live here. It means they don't want to go into a polling place. That's a deliberate attempt on the part of the radical right to keep people away from voting. That's going to be really important to turn out for. There's 2 gubernatorial elections I'm going to go with New Jersey, and Maryland? Virginia. It's Virginia. New Jersey and Virginia. There are important Supreme Court seats in Pennsylvania. Learn about what is crucial in your state and show up for it and get all your friends to show up for it. Work with people like Red Wine and Blue, because many of those races are going to be determined simply by turnout. So rather than sort of sitting here agonizing about 2026, there are 52,000 things we can do right now. So keep those things going. And again, the more that you can put on social media about protecting our country, about the cost of groceries, about the things that you're upset about, and crucially, the things that you want to build. I mean, we're starting to see more and more voices talking about the kind of world that we would like to see. And again, I'm going to throw out universal health care. I want better education, but whatever your issues are, whatever, we may agree, we may not. But the point is, we want not just to say we don't like this, but we want to address the many ways in which the past 40 years, at least, of our country have not served the majority of us. So start thinking about what you can put out there to say, hey, yeah, this is something I really care about, because I suspect you're going to find that what you want is popular among way more than 50% of the American people. And with that kind of pressure, the reason all of this matters is not, as I say, because somebody like Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, the former Senate Majority Leader, is suddenly going to see the light and say, oh, yes, of course, I should have agreed to universal health care. He's not going to. But the people who are running for office now are. And if you think about our major changes during midterm elections in our history, they have come from a wave of new voices, new people coming in, or older people who say, oh, wait, I need those votes, who change the entire nature of the American government. And they can't do it unless they know what we want. So this is our job now to step up and say, hey, yeah, I want X, and here's an idea for how it might work, or I want Y, and here's an idea for how that might work. Those things are going to be really, really important, because either we are headed toward an authoritarian government in which all our job can be is to try and push back against it and to make people have access to what the world used to look like and what the Constitution used to mean, or we get to rebuild something better. And if you look at the sheer number of people around this country who care about fixing our democracy, that's where the real weight is. And we need absolutely to emphasize that. Now, one of the questions people asked is, and I've said this before, is, should you be afraid that the government is going to keep lists of the people who show up to the No King's Day protests? And my answer to that is unique to me, by the way. You should think this through on your own. But my answer to that is, the whole point of Doge appears to have been to go through government files and scrape them of all of our information. And I think that that's a really, really, really dangerous thing. I'm very unhappy about that. Do I think showing up at a No King's Day rally is going to be the thing that pushes somebody over an edge? Personally, I don't. That river is already wet. So I'm not terribly worried about that. But I'm also in a very enviable position. I don't have young children. I don't have dependents. I can be a little bit more cavalier than other people can. So I'm less worried about that. I would point out to you once again, though, something I said last week and people asked me to repeat, and that is this administration is trying to get rid of the First Amendment, your right to assemble, which is in the First Amendment, peacefully, your right to a free press, your right to speak your mind. It is cracking down on all those things. And if you think about saying something and you decide it's not safe to do it, you've already lost your right to free speech. And so I think I said before, I think about it sometimes. I think about what I'm going to say. And And I always come back to the fact that I have to be sure it's true to the best of my knowledge. That is a defense. I have to be sure it's true, but I also have to dare to keep speaking up, because if I start self-censoring, I've done exactly what Timothy Snyder says. I've obeyed in advance. So that's something to think about anyway, as we're entering into what looks like it's going to be a really dark winter. But we have each other, and we have the principles of the United States of America on our side. And those are the principles people have fought for almost 250 years. And for all that I think I can speak, I don't usually try to speak for everybody, but in this case, I will. For all the fact that I think all of us would rather we weren't in a position to have to defend those principles, it's kind of a privilege to be at a place where we get to be the ones in this wild, crazy 21st century to say that those profound human principles of having the right to self-determination are still important enough to those of us in the United States to protect them, even in the face of the juggernaut of MAGA Republicans. And if I didn't think we could do it, I wouldn't be here. All right. Thank you for being here, and I will see you. Actually, I'm going to see you a lot for the rest of my schedule. Just gets fuller and fuller. But Joanne and I will be here. I'm doing something tomorrow. I'm interviewing somebody tomorrow, and I'll let you know about that if it's not already up. And Joanne and I will be here at 10:30. Honestly, probably 10:40, but we'll schedule it for 10:30 on Saturday morning. And I think Sunday is off, and then things are happening again next week. Just a reminder for those of you who have found me on YouTube or who are on Facebook and would like to at least check in on YouTube, I do write the news not the news necessarily. I write about how the news fits into American history about 6 nights a week, sometimes 7. They are free. They're on Facebook, or they are on YouTube now under notes, or they are on Substack, either without a paywall or you can have them sent to you. So you can find out more about this stuff if you want. I'm trying to keep a record for the future. So sometimes they're a little bit more in the weeds than I think people want, but I'm trying to think of what historians will want to see in 150 years. All right. Thank you for being here. And somebody just said they will already be at a No King's Day rally on Saturday. Go for it. Maybe Joanne and I will find another time. I'll let you know about that. Ours are later, but that's a really good point. So thank you for being here, and I will see you again soon.